Hi, I'm Janice Switlo, and today I want to talk a little bit about the Louisiana Purchase as instructive on relations in Canada between Indigenous nations and the Crown. It's important to compare documents that have been put in place, treaties that have been put in place, with other such actions done elsewhere. So, for example, for France, holding and defending land so far from Europe was growing too expensive and troublesome. And the area of Louisiana Purchase is, basically the mid of what is now the United States, if you will, up to Canada. So for France, holding and defending land so far from Europe was growing too expensive and troublesome. The defeat at the hands of slave forces in Saint Dominique was especially galling to Napoleon, who believed he needed to husband his resources for campaigns closer to home. Napoleon was in his bath, soaking in cologne-scented water, when his brothers came in to protest the decision to sell Louisiana. Quote, "You will have no need to lead the opposition," Napoleon told his brothers, "for I repeat, there will be no debate. For the reason that the project conceived by me, negotiated by me, shall be ratified and executed by me alone. Do you comprehend me?" Continuing, "I renounce Louisiana," Napoleon announced to Finance Minister early in the morning of April 11, 1803. And it says, "It is not only New Orleans that I will cede, it is the whole colony without any reservation. I know the price of what I abandon. I renounce it with the greatest respect. But to attempt obstinately to retain it would be folly." So you hear that. He says, I know what I'm abandoning. I do so without reservation. Right? I renounce. Never have I heard any of that kind of language or use of those kinds of terms by Indigenous nationals, by leaders of Indigenous nations. Never. They always say, this is my land, this is where I'm from, this is where my children are, this is where their children will be. And for those who misconstrue the terms of the treaties, they say, oh, well, you sold the land. No, those treaties do not have terms of sale. They have included to have and to hold, creating interests that are beneath their continuing ownership. So look at the example that exists in the Louisiana Purchase Treaty of 1803. And that is in Article 1. "And whereas, in pursuance of the treaty, and particularly of the third article, the French Republic has an incontestable title to the domain and to the possession of the territory." Domain and possession is not ownership and underlying title. So when this was happening, it was acknowledging that there's still Indigenous nations. What they were, a country, a nation can only transfer what it itself possesses. And this is a problem that Canada has, because the underlying title, as acknowledged and is clearly set out in the treaties, remains with the Indigenous nations. Her Majesty, the country, is not the formal legal name for Canada is the Dominion of Canada. That remains the exact legal name. As a matter of simply preference, Canada is using the term Canada, but it's the Dominion of Canada. That's again an acknowledgement that the Crown does not own underlying title. And of course, possession, same concept. So when you have a situation where the Crown is obligated by duty of fairness to enter into treaties throughout the area that the Indigenous nations own, then you have the situation of Canada, and in particular right now the province of British Columbia, purporting to own when they do not. It all hinges on what Indigenous nationals have to say themselves. And this is why, as I've mentioned in an earlier episode, the words chosen, be careful of the meanings. Be clear in what you say. Be consistent in what you say. For goodness sakes, drop references to any terms you find in the Section 35 cases, in the Section 35 doctrine. And know that, know what these treaties really are. Know what you actually have. Put aside, and this worries me a great deal, what kind of treaty education is mandated and now going forward in schools and universities across Canada. I suspect it's a repetition of the big lie that Indigenous nationals sold their lands. They still own them, and that's all I have to say.